We are on. Welcome to a special report of We Act Radio. I am Erin Matson. I'm the editor-at-large at RH Reality Check. We're a daily publication covering sexual health and justice. You can find us at www.rhrealitycheck.org. And I'm joined here today by Karen Evans, who is the co-chair of the National Medical Malpractice Group for Cochran Law Firm, and David Haynes, who's the managing partner for Cochran Law Firm. And we're going to talk about something very concerning. What's been happening in Baltimore this year, we now have two separate gynecologists who've been accused of taking inappropriate photographs of their patients. And so we're going to dive into this a little bit more. To give you a little background, the first doctor, a Dr. Levy, earlier this year was accused of taking photographs of hundreds of patients. And he actually has committed suicide at this point in the investigation, or as the investigation was proceeding. However, now there is a second case that has come forward, a Dr. Yakub, who has been accused of taking photographs of his patients. And Cochran Law Firm has actually been fielding calls from some of those patients. So let's dive right in. Karen, these cases are so shocking precisely because you go to the doctor thinking, help me, not help yourself. And I'm wondering what you're hearing from patients. I have to imagine that they're shocked.
Shocked is a word, but mostly concerned because they have been watching television and then imagining that you heard your doctor was a victim of, was under investigation for some what seemed to be criminal activity, certainly medical investigations, and you realize that it involved taking pictures of patients as well as some sort of illicit drug use. So you'd be very concerned. So we've received calls from patients who are concerned about how it affects them.
And I want to back up and talk a little bit more about patients hearing about it on the news, because one concept that we talk about often in the sexual justice community is this idea of rape culture, this idea that not only are there perpetrators, but there's an entire culture that aids, abets, and supports sexual assault. And in this context, it sounds like what you're saying is these patients heard about it first on the news. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
So tell me a little bit, David, I believe you had some information about actually, was this doctor suspended some time ago?
Well, that's right. The investigation and news reports are revealing that Dr. Yakub, who was originally at Greater Baltimore Medical Center up until 2009, and then he was with St. Agnes, another hospital in the Baltimore County area, and he was suspended from that position in November of last year. And so there obviously were serious concerns that have been raised at that point. You referenced the DEA investigation. There are concerns regarding purchasing and improper use of controlled substances, distributing that to patients, one of whom was apparently Dr. Yakub's girlfriend, and other things. So our individuals who are contacting us are obviously asking questions as to why wasn't I even notified earlier that there were these concerns about the doctor at that time. He continued to practice in a private setting for the last 11 months. Yet that this information apparently had not been made public. So patients who had seen him over the past 11 months did not have the benefit of this disturbing information. It's only now that news reports are surfacing due to the recent DEA execution of a search warrant at Dr. Yakub's home that this information is coming out. And this is playing out almost exactly like the Dr. Levy situation in that regard, in that it was not until news reports came out that then the patients found out. And in this situation, Dr. Yakub is reported to have about 10,000 former patients in the Baltimore area, which Dr. Levy, who is at the Johns Hopkins campus in East Baltimore, had at least about the same number. We represent hundreds of those patients, and so unfortunately we have, again, thousands of patients who are rightly concerned about whether their privacy has been violated.
It's truly shocking and mind-boggling to think that there has been no formal notification to the patients that an investigation is ongoing and that it's simply a matter of watching the news. I want to talk a little bit more, Karen, about what the patients are telling you. It's my understanding that with this latest doctor, Dr. Yakub, that he was actually in some instances using a personal cell phone, and so it wasn't a surreptitious recording. Can you tell us a little more about this?
That's my understanding from having talked to patients who have called to our office, and this person reported that there was a photograph taken and it was a personal cell phone that was used. didn't raise concern because you're in a doctor's office, you're up in stirrups, and it's very hard to to exert any kind of control in such circumstances. And so this patient is and other patients are very concerned about what's happening, and what does it mean for them, and obviously feeling like they have been exploited, and want to know what their legal rights are. So at this point, we're just gathering information because there is an ongoing police investigation, and we need to get information through that source as well as try to develop information through the course of our investigation.
The reports are out today as well, Erin, that Dr. Yacoub's criminal counsel is trying to draw this distinction between the situation with Dr. Levy and Dr. Yacoub, and that this was a personal cell phone, as you mentioned, and so therefore this was, they claim, was for a legitimate medical purpose. But obviously there are a lot of questions about that. One, the personal phone, it was found in his home. This was does not appear to be official office protocol. There obviously are concerns regarding HIPAA, that these images were stored and not in a safe area. And also, we're consulting with medical experts, but we have grave concern, obviously, that this was not legitimate in the first place. Of course, this is a pretextual reason that he is using. So they are trying to draw a distinction here, but it is equally disturbing. Even if for these patients he may have let them know they were taking a picture, did they really understand what the appropriate use was, or were they simply relying upon their doctor that, well, this must be medically appropriate, rather than him having some ulterior and prurient motivation?
Well, and it certainly raises questions about both authority and, deference to authority, and particularly at the gynecologist's office, a number of women just want to get in, get out, and keep moving. But it also raises questions about informed consent and what policies are in place in medical institutions right now, particularly the ones in this context. What sorts of materials are they receiving in advance about their ability to say no to a proposed procedure? And also, is it possible for someone else to be in the room? Do they have a second opinion? Tell me about that. Have we heard about other policies that should have helped?
Well, yes. And I'm glad that you brought this up. Both of us are women, not to exclude you, David.
No
but
offense.
as a woman, when you're in the doctor's office and you're having a gynecological examination, the first thing that I think everybody has to remember is that you're up in stirrups. You're in a very vulnerable position, and when your doctor is conducting the examination, speaking personally, the only thing you want is for it to be over. And it is not really an ideal time to discuss a lot of information that the patient may need to rely upon at some point, or to ask questions. The patient feels very vulnerable at that time. There is the AMA guidelines recommend that from the standpoint of ethics and prudence, that a doctor should have someone in the room with him at all times when you're conducting an evaluation of either the breast, the pelvic area, or the rectal area. And that's to give the patient some sense of security and to make sure that everything is done appropriately. In the calls that we have received, it appears as though there was not a chaperone in the room. And oftentimes, I think that not every woman knows that you have the right to ask for a chaperone. So if nothing else comes out of this process, this evaluation, these legal issues that are arising because of doctors and perhaps bad conduct in this instance with Dr. Yacoub, and I say it like that because we don't know exactly what is happening with him at this point. But the thing that should be of utmost concern at this time, and that patients should know, is that you have a right to ask for a chaperone. You don't have to be in the room with the doctor alone.
And that's incredibly important to kind of circle back and realize that we need to have, as a broader culture, not just in specific medical institutions, which needs to be held accountable to really providing good informed consent procedures to their patients, as well as making sure that that's understood, as well as making it clear that a chaperone is available. It's something that really isn't widely known. That there's also some legal issues that we might want to talk about. So I want to talk about who should be held liable if he is found guilty of these charges. The doctor, the medical Malpractice, a state board of physicians? Who should we be looking at here?
Well, obviously the doctor, he is responsible for his own conduct, but you also have to look at the institutions where he worked and practiced medicine to see whether or not they were adhering to appropriate standards and guidelines, and whether or not they were appropriately supervising or turning a blind eye to things that could have been discovered had they simply investigated. So that would be my perspective on it, is that at this point, it would be the physician and the institutions where he practiced medicine. Obviously, we would have to take a look at all of that, but that's a starting point.
And there are real concerns regarding supervision, as well as looking at Dr. Yakub's past. What were appropriate background checks done at the time of hiring, which is a negligent hiring claim potentially, as well as supervision. What were they doing to monitor what conduct he was doing there, as far as taking these personal pictures and so forth? Other co-employees or his supervisor should have reported these, and as well as what were the policies that were in place at St. Agnes and GBMC regarding the chaperone that Karen and you were discussing it at Johns Hopkins. In the Dr. Levy case, there was a policy in place that every exam have a female chaperone, but in practice it was not being followed. And so those are some of the questions that we'll be asking on behalf of the clients that have contacted us.
I want to talk a little bit. It's interesting. There's this angle of gender, of course, that's in here, that both of these gynecologists were men doctors, and so I think there's some things to untangle there. There's also some concerns, particularly in the first case of the Dr. Levy, that a number of the patients that he treated were low-income patients, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. Did they think it would be easy to switch to another doctor? Does our healthcare system make it easy for people to switch doctors if they feel uncomfortable?
Well, we certainly saw that in the situation with Dr. Levy, which was in a clinic originated out of East Baltimore that Johns Hopkins took over many years ago. We had a number of patients that came to us and say that they had complained about Dr. Levy's conduct many times, but the response was that you did not have access to another physician within the network because you were a Medicaid patient. There were a lot of socioeconomic issues that were raised, as well as gender, and when you put all of those things together, obviously these patients did not know or feel as if that they could advocate for themselves and their rights and privacy and control over their own bodies, and what a terrible violation that was. And so there are larger socioeconomic issues that are raised, larger issues regarding access to health care, to the extent that those were at play here as well with Dr. Yakub, certainly to a degree, as we talked about with gender, and where we will be finding more out about the patient population, what complaints have been made about Dr. Yakub, were they acted upon, were patients given the right to use or to see another physician, or was that denied? So access to appropriate health care, and of course you have the right to have a physician examine you, particularly in this setting, who you're comfortable with and who is going to respect you and your body and your health care needs, and not be motivated by his own personal perverted interest.
And when we talk about healthcare and we talk about poverty and we talk about race and we talk about class, one thing that we know statistically is that for many women who do receive any health care at all, there are a number of people who don't have access to any health care, period. For many women who don't get much health care, that annual exam at the gynecologist may be the only medical exam and the only medical care that they get in an entire year. So I want to talk a little bit about what effect do you think that predators like this and insufficient guards against predators like this has on low-income women and their access to health care as a whole?
I think it's crucial. I think it has a major impact, because and you have to think about, is that which came first? Is it the which came first? Was it the fact that the doctor had these issues that led him to this particular patient population, or did the patient population that he found himself in create an environment where he could engage in the kind of activity? Either way, I mean, we know enough about healthcare and the way in which healthcare is delivered to understand the inequities that come about when you are low social economic group and you're dealing with someone who you view in a state of power, like a physician, and particularly in a vulnerable delivery of healthcare, like where you're getting a pelvic exam, your woman's exam, where you're completely unclothed, which has taken away all barriers that we all put on every day. We all wear our clothes because that's our armor, so to speak, that protects us against the, violations and the world. And when you strip all that away, you not only take off the clothing, but you also become very vulnerable. And I think that that's a key situation, which brings us back to the need to have a chaperone, or at least to give the patient an opportunity to have a chaperone so that they can have some sense of control, and also perhaps maybe prevent some of this from happening if there's a watchful eye. Um, it's a terrible violation.
It's heinous. Yes.
And Erin, to your point regarding the annual exam being often the only exam or the only health care that they get, we saw that time and again in Dr. Levy's case, where this was the only health care that these patients were getting, and actually Dr. Levy was taking advantage of that situation and became very jealous and protective, and instructing these women not to see a primary care physician, or for him to deal with all of their health care needs in that one setting, because of course he wanted to limit their education and their access to other medical providers who might start asking questions, or a patient may express concern. So these are all, of course, warning signs. To the degree that Dr. Yacoub may have been doing this as well, we don't know at this time. It's early in the investigation, but you're absolutely right that we saw this as a pattern in practice in the Dr. Levy case.
And often with abusers, you see that they will display classic abuser behavior, things like trying to isolate people and such. I do want to talk a little bit more about just healthcare in general, and what questions does this raise more broadly? Do we need to have better consent practices on the books? What sort of education things? Is there a role to play beyond medical providers? Is this something that needs to be discussed in schools, et cetera?
I think that's a great question. As a nurse, in my background, I was a nurse, and it seems to me that it is an issue of education. I think I related to you a story about the fact that I changed medical providers because I didn't like the way in which the health care was being delivered to me, in the sense that a doctor would give me great information, but I was up in stirrups. And when I got home, I couldn't remember any of it because I was so uncomfortable with the whole process. And so I changed so that I have a doctor who talks to me in his office before the examination. We have the examination, and then he comes back to talk to me in his office after I'm fully clothed and my brain works better. I think that's a better practice, to at least have some opportunity where a physician talks to the patient after the examination is completed. I know that may seem like an ideal situation, but why isn't it the norm? I mean, isn't the idea of healthcare delivery is that we want our patients to be more informed so that they can make better choices, not just in the doctor's office, but when they go home. I think that helps with preventative medicine care, and maybe avoid a lot of the problems that we have that continue and perpetuate themselves. So yes, I think there's a role for greater informed consent. For example, patients should be informed. There should be a sign in the doctor's office that says, if it's a gynecological examination, that you have a right to have a chaperone present. You shouldn't have to ask. You shouldn't put the patient in the position of having to ask if you want a chaperone. There should be a sign. And then someone should ask the patient before the doctor comes in, would you like a chaperone? And then that way the patient has a choice and can decide for themselves how do they want the evaluation or examination to be conducted. Because not everybody is comfortable with a chaperone, but everybody should have the right to have access to a chaperone if they want one.
And this idea of patient-centered care brings up some broader questions again about, it's not just the patient and the doctor in the room. You can also have someone else in to support you and back you up. But that makes me want to seg a little bit into the issue that we're talking about photographs here. And so we're not just talking about a physical assault between a doctor and a patient necessarily, that these photographs may also potentially could be transmitted. And so from a legal angle, are there other issues with that these are photographs that exist out there?
That's a grave concern. And in the Dr. Levy situation, our viewers may recall that it was widely reported that as a result of the search of his home, that 10 hard drives and 6 servers were recovered. And that's very distressing, of course, to the former patient population and to our clients, because of the sharing, obviously, that was going on the servers of this sort of material. And unfortunately, there are reports that from law enforcement that there may be underground sites and so forth that are focusing on these kind of gynecological issues. And when you have patients who don't know whether their images are out there and whether they've been distributed internationally, that is incredibly distressing. And so here, whenever we have a digital image, regardless of whether Dr. Yakub says what's on his personal cell phone, who else had access to those pictures, was he sharing it with other people? So that's incredibly concerning as well. And to go to Karen's point, your earlier discussion regarding reforms, education, this is one of the roles that we will be playing and that the trial lawyer plays in these cases, is not only to try to get financial compensation for individuals whose privacy has been breached, who have been harmed and emotionally distressed, but also to try to promote reform within the industry, increase standards, and increase education through the legal process. And that's really a goal of ours as well. And so part of that process has to be increased awareness among medical staff and nursing staff and colleagues regarding photography. And because obviously this is a problem which is occurring, and we have two situations here in Baltimore. Where else might this be occurring around the country?
That's a profoundly disturbing question, and well, we can be so grateful that trial lawyers help to advance this cause and help move the needle forward. At the same time, it's still incredibly distressing that people are coming to you on the basis of news reports and that there hasn't been an official notification still. There's a hearing tomorrow. What's going to happen and what can we expect?
Well, at this point, the indications are that Dr. Yakub will request a continuance tomorrow. There has been a temporary suspension. There are a lot of concerns from the DEA standpoint, as well as with the controlled substances, which is obviously raises a lot of question marks regarding the other inappropriate conduct and the motivations that he may have had. But our firm will be monitoring the situation closely, all of the criminal activities as well as the administrative activities. It appears clear this is a man whose license should not be reinstated. And so to the extent that we can advocate for our patients in this regard, we absolutely will. We'll be continuing our investigation. Your viewers should know that if they were a former patient of Dr. Yakub's, that they may contact us, that there is no fee for representation. We handle all of these matters on a contingency basis, and we can be contacted at any time at 1-800-THE-FIRM to further investigate these cases, and we'll be monitoring the process, and we'll be a liaison with the administrative agency, with the Maryland Medical Board, as well as with the law enforcement authorities to be sure that our clients' rights are protected.
And I would just add, in the event that you want to talk with a woman, I'm certainly available to talk about these issues. They are very sensitive issues, and you don't have to be violated twice to have a right to have a legal claim.
Absolutely, and as Karen mentioned, she's a former nurse, focuses on medical malpractice, and we also have a dedicated all-female staff which is assisting with our patient population and our clients on the Levy matter and on the Dr. Yakub matter.
All right, so last question. What can we do to prevent this in the future?
Well, I think we can, one, prosecute those folks who have been the perpetrators of this type of action, and then going forward, we need to make sure that the patient population is informed and to stay vigilant.
Great. Anything else to add?
Thank you, Erin.
All right, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Erin.